Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this evening for the world premiere of Un kilomètre à pied, or 1 kilometer by foot, which tells the true story of my grandmother, Jeanne Gurtat, as she courageously led a group of Jewish children over the French border into Switzerland during World War II. My name is Rachel Menyuk, and I'm the director of tonight's piece, as well as a company member with Pointless Theater. For those of you who are not familiar with Pointless Theater's work, we are a Washington, D.C. based company dedicated to gleefully smashing the boundaries between puppetry, theater, dance, music, and the visual arts. What you will be watching tonight is the culmination of over 9 months of work by 10 incredibly dedicated and talented artists from within the company. This would not have been possible without the generous support of Pointless Theater, the incredible support of our communities, and in my case, the loving support of my entire family. So, thank you from the very bottom of my heart. I did make notes because I was a little nervous. If you are able, we would love for you to stick around after the showing and join us for a panel discussion with members of Jeanne's family, as well as with designers from the show. It's going to be really fun, so stick around for it. And I think with that being said, without any further ados or anything, please sit back and enjoy Un kilomètre à pied.
1 kilomètre à pied, ça use, ça use. 1 kilomètre à pied, ça use les souliers. 2 kilomètres à pied, ça use, ça use. 2 kilomètres à pied, ça use les souliers. 3 kilomètres à pied, ça use, ça use. 3 kilomètres à pied, ça use les souliers.
the militia was looking for me because they heard that the organization, they discovered there was an organization that was trying to help out with the transport of children to Switzerland.
On cherche Jeanne Gurtat. Elle n'est pas là.
Well, there was a transport of children that was coming on December 24th, 1942. And my father said, you and your sister are going to leave because we want you safe. Well, when parents of my brownies heard that I was going to go away to Switzerland, they decided they wanted some of the children to come with me. They told me to go to the French Girl Scout movement. They provide us with false identification card because I wasn't a French citizen.
Partisans, ouvriers et paysans, à vos armes. Ce soir, l'ennemi connaîtra le prix du sang et des larmes. Montez de la mine, descendez des collines, camarades. Sortez de la paille, les fusils à mitraille, les
We're 14 children, 13 and my sister.
à la balle ou au couteau, tuez vite. Oui, saboteur, attention à ton fardeau, dynamite.
I told everybody to meet us at the station in the late afternoon in Grenoble. This was December 24th, 1942. We got to the station, all the children were dressed in uniform, scout uniform. as we're getting closer to the Saint-Julien, there was a German patrol that came up on the train. They opened up the door of the compartment where we're staying, and right away I started with the children. We started to sing.
Kilomètre à pied, ça use,
1 kilomètre à pied, ça use, ça use. 1 kilomètre à pied, ça use les souliers. 2 kilomètres à pied, ça use, ça use. 2 kilomètres à pied, ça use les souliers. 3 kilomètres à pied, ça use, ça use. 3 kilomètres à pied, ça use les souliers. Ça use les souliers.
When we got to Saint-Julien, we had to cross the city because we had a meeting place with this French peasant in a cafe, but close to the border. But don't forget also it was Christmas Eve. So there were a lot of Germans that were laughing, drinking, and singing on the streets. And so we decided we're going to cross the street, the town, and we'll be singing also.
Ça use, ça use. 1 kilomètre à pied, ça use les souliers. 2 kilomètres à pied, ça use, ça use. 2 kilomètres à pied, ça use les souliers. 3 kilomètres à pied, ça use, ça use. 3 kilomètres à pied, ça use les souliers. 4 kilomètres à pied, ça use, ça use. 4 kilomètres à pied, ça use les souliers. 5 kilomètres à pied, ça use, ça use. 5 kilomètres à pied, ça use les souliers. 6 kilomètres à pied, ça use, ça use. 6 kilomètres à pied, ça use les souliers. 7 kilomètres à pied, ça use, ça use. 7 kilomètres à pied, ça use les souliers. 8 kilomètres à pied, ça use, ça use. 8 kilomètres à pied, ça use les souliers.
It was snowing, and the night and the days were very short, so the nightfall was like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. It was already dark.
Ça use les souliers. 10 kilomètres à pied, ça use, ça use. 10 kilomètres à pied, ça use les souliers.
I cannot cross this group with you today because he said yesterday I crossed children. There was a group, 14, 15 children, and they were sent back from Switzerland to the hand of the Germans. And he said, I cannot have this on my conscience, and I cannot do it. So then I turned around to him and I said, well, but we cannot go back, because if we go back to Grenoble, and if I go back to these children, some of the parents asked me to take care of these children. I am my sister, and I promised my parents I would take care of my sister. I cannot go back. all right, what I can do, we'll leave when it's very dark. He said, I'll take my bicycle, and with my tail light, my red tail light, you'll follow me, and I'll point you the direction of Switzerland. But he said, but I'm not going to cross with you. It will be your responsibility. Well, I guess I was brave. I don't know. But I didn't want to go back to Grenoble. So I said, all right. So we were walking, and all of a sudden, no more lights. I couldn't see the light. There was no light, and it was pitch dark. You could see only the stars on the sky and the snow on the ground.
Un kilomètre à pied, ça use, ça use. Un kilomètre à pied, ça use les souliers. 2 kilomètres à pied, ça use, ça use. 2 kilomètres à pied, ça use les souliers. 3 kilomètres à pied, ça use, ça use. 3 kilomètres à pied.
but I didn't know where to go, left or right. So I decided, just on a hunch, I said to the children, we are going to go through on the right side through this vineyard. Everybody on the ground and no noise. So we just lay flat on our tummies. And I said, don't move, don't cough, don't sneeze, nothing. If you can, let's be quiet. Let's get up and let's run to the other side. Excuse me, but I'm on an outing with my brownies here, and I got lost. I don't know exactly where I am. So she looked at me and she said, you are safe. You are in Switzerland.
Ready?
Do it.
1 kilomètre à pied,
ça use,
ça use.
1 kilomètre à pied,
Ça use les souliers. 2 kilomètres à pied,
ça use, ça use.
2 kilomètres à pied, ça use les souliers. 3 kilomètres à pied, ça use, ça use. 3 kilomètres à pied, ça use les souliers. 4 kilomètres à pied, ça use, 4 kilomètres à pied, ça use les souliers.
Here we are. I think Sadie is muted.
I am, but I'm back now. I was just saying thank you everyone so much for joining us for the world premiere of Un kilomètre à pied. I took Spanish class, not French, but I'm Sadie Lee. I'm a company member with Pointless Theater, and I was the production manager, among a bunch of other things, for this project. And thanks for sticking around for the post-show panel. I want to start with our fearless leader, the incredible, brilliant visionary, Rachel Menyuk, our director. And Rachel, I just want to ask, first off, if you can tell us a little bit about how this project came to be and what inspired you to want to tell this story in the way that we did.
Sure, yeah. I mean, as I mentioned earlier, this story is about my grandmother, my Bubby, as I called her. And it was a story that's always been a big part of our family history. And when Pointless was launching its workshop series and we were looking for ways to tell stories in a digital platform, right? Because we all knew that this year was going to be different, that we couldn't be together in the theater. And for some reason, I kept coming back to this story. And part of it is just me. I'm an archivist. I work with family history, and I was working on some of my own family history. And I was like, you know what? This is the story I want to tell right now, to reconnect with not just the company and working on it, but also having the chance to like reach out to my mom and my uncle and my sisters and say, hey, I really want to do this. Are you interested in having this story told? You know?
Absolutely. Great. Well, I would love to check in with your family, three of whom are here to speak with us this evening. We're so lucky to have them. And we have, I'll just name Rachel's mom, Jeanne's daughter. And that is Claire. And then we also have Eric Schwartz, who's Jeanne's son and Rachel's uncle. And we also have Laura Menyuk, who is Rachel's sister, and as such, also Jeanne's granddaughter. So for any of the three of you. And the question is, we told this story inevitably through the lens of Rachel because she was our director. She was the one that shared the story with the company and sort of the whole thing. But obviously, this is just part of a much larger story. And I'm curious what's a favorite part of the story for you that you didn't see presented here tonight?
Well, I guess for me, it was the trip from Besançon to Grenoble that you weren't able to do in the story because there was so much going on, so much to tell. But on their way they weren't supposed to go to Grenoble, so they were really on their way to Bordeaux. My mother and her father were on their way to try to get a boat out of France because they had family in the United States and in Brazil. And so my grandfather wanted to leave France, but on their way, their train was bombed. And they fortunately survived the bombing and just ended up in Grenoble because that's where the next train was going, and they didn't have much of a choice. So that to me was a really important part of the story that was not able to be told.
Yeah, Rachel told us about that part too, that they like hid underneath the train at one point. And there was a version, I think, when we were going to have that in the piece as well. And so much to fit into such a short time frame. So thank you for sharing that with our audience tonight. Laura or Eric, do you have thoughts about that question?
Yeah, I'll say one thing that as a child anyway that I thought about a lot, and it isn't necessarily the focus of all of the story, was simply the fact that my mother and sister were separated from their parents for such a long period of time, for a couple of years, until the war ended. After they went to Switzerland, and my aunt, who was with my mother, was living in a hostel for children in the Swiss Alps during that entire period. So she was separate from my mother, who spent the war in Lugano, the rest of the war in Lugano, working for the Red Cross. And so it was not only the fact of the crossing, but the fact that for that prolonged period of time, at that age, they lived through that separation, was very difficult for me to understand how they did that when I was a child, anyway, because it had to have been very traumatic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Ooh, I'm getting a little echo. Is that okay for everyone? Okay, we fixed it. Thank you. I want to pull a question from the audience. And I'm going to put two together because I think they may be related. One is a question about who received the children in Switzerland. And then Rachel and company, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel that this question is related. Has your family connected with any of the families of the other 13 children? Something in there?
No, we have not. The family we actually connected with was the family that hid our grandparents during the war, and they had kept in touch with my grandparents after the war, and my father, who was the early archivist of the family and historian, kept a lot of documents and letters. And unfortunately, after he passed away, I found the living relatives of that family, and we met them all.
So these were Jeanne's parents who were hidden in the Alps by a family on a farm in a town called Montchaffray.
Right, but we don't. My mother didn't even have all the names of all the children she took with her, so she did not keep in touch with them.
That's another project.
I think we did go up to the Alps to meet the family that my grandparents had stayed with when about 10 years after the war had ended, and when my sister and I were little children. And they very graciously greeted us and treated us to warm goat milk that we turned our noses up at as young American children who weren't used to that kind of exotic life. And I don't think, at least speaking for myself, I was 5 at the time, I really fully understood or measured just what they had been through and what this whole experience meant to them. And it was only really later, as an adolescent, and when I was in college, that I began, I think, personally, to form a more intense view or appreciation of what our mother had gone through. Because I don't think during most of our upbringing, but my sister can correct me, that my mother really touted, what she had done. She was really quite modest about it, it seemed to me.
Yeah, although I remember her telling me the story when I was very young, and it played pretty important part of my entire life, I think.
Yeah, that's actually a great segue into another question that I was hoping to ask you all tonight. Just in working with Rachel on this project, she told us in so many different ways at so many different times that her grandmother has always been a real hero in her life, a real inspiration. And I think it's clear to see why the bravery and courage that she showed through this process is truly unimaginable. And I wanted to ask you all how this story has inspired or informed a moment in your life, maybe a moment of taking action or a moment of decision making. And maybe Laura, if something's coming to mind, we haven't heard from you yet.
Sure, I'll jump in. Thanks. I first want to congratulate my sister and the Pointless Theater Company team that put this together, because it's absolutely incredible, and it's an honor to our grandmother's memories, and I hope to the memories of the other children and participants in that event. So thank you, everyone. And I think your question ties a little bit into the question of what is the part of the story that wasn't really here, that was left out. And somebody sort of asked, who met them in Switzerland. And it was, in fact, the Border Patrol that let them into the country. And our grandmother's, whose birthday was on December 26th and was about to turn 18 and become an adult, shouldn't have been let into the country because they were no longer accepting adults, which, as a now adult and thinking about, again, children coming by themselves to this country and others, is like, fills me with emotion. And at the time, it had sort of a sense of like, wow, what good luck. And sort of, I don't remember if she used these words or my mother did in the retelling of the story, in the ways that families make stories their own, that it was like, happy birthday, like you get to be free in Switzerland. And that part of the story, to me, that combination of like bravery and luck, I don't think has informed any specific moment in my life, but it has put a lens on how I view the world, that there's just this combination of, we have the power to take actions, and we should, and we must. And like, I only hope that I might be as brave as she was at that age at any point in my life ever. And that also, we sometimes luck just comes our way or it doesn't. And these are the things we live with and accept.
Yeah. Thanks, Laura. I think we have time for one more question, and someone in the comments asked if you all can tell us anything more about the audio, the actual, we got to hear her voice. We got to hear the story through her actual voice, which is like such a blessing. And can you tell us more about how we got to do that?
Well, yeah, I can just speak to the interview, which was produced by the Shoah Foundation. In 1996, my grandmother gave an hour-and-a-half interview about her life in Poland before she moved to France with her family, then during the war. And the Shoah Foundation, it's still an active organization through USC, and it really came about because of Steven Spielberg, and it sort of came about after Schindler's List was produced as a way of capturing these stories of resilience and survival around genocide. And so the Shoah Foundation, it has a whole archive, in fact, online, and you can search for various stories being told. And in addition to Holocaust stories, they also highlight other genocides around the world, and it's really important work that they are doing. So
thanks, Rachel. So yeah, so if you want to hear more about this story specifically, that's an option for you. You can find that through the Shoah Foundation, and we did, as a story team, get to access that full interview and watch that together and sort of parse out what bits of the story we wanted to include in this project. So I definitely recommend checking that out if you want to learn more about Jeanne. And with that, we are going to wrap up the family portion of the panel, but thank you, Laura, Claire, and Eric for joining us this evening. It's such a pleasure to share this with you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for producing this.
Thank you.
So next we're going to bring on some of our, not all because there's so many, but some of our amazing designers that worked on this project. And as we do that, Rachel, I'm going to start with you again. And I want to ask, knowing that this project really relied heavily on a bunch of different designers and that most of the time we were all many miles apart, how did you maneuver and navigate the creation of this work during a time when we were all mostly pretty isolated?
Yeah, it was not always easy, but I mean, this group is incredible. Like, I'm just going to put that out there. I'm so grateful and so thankful for this group of artists. There was a lot of Zoom happening. So at the very beginning, sort of around January, the story team, which was Sadie and Mel and Eric, who will join us in a minute, we were meeting once a week on Zoom, and we were doing screen sharing and watching the interviews together and just using a Google Doc and, doing it that way. And then as we progressed and we brought in more designers, it was really just about keeping connected through emails and through text messages. And even, looking at, so section 3, which I designed with Mike Winch and Patty Khalil, it was like, I would hand draw things, scan them, send them to Patty. Patty would color them, give them to Mike. Mike would input them into the design software. So it was really about, splitting up roles in a way that made sense, and then just continuing to communicate as best as we could over all these various technological things that we've allowed ourselves to, that have become such a huge part of our lives.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Rachel. And we have some of the other designers joining us, Navi, Mel, and Eric. Thank you for being here. And folks who are still with us, if you have questions for these designers, feel free to put them in the comments. But I'll go to Eric next, who co-designed section 4, which was the Cranky and the shadow puppets. And Eric, you seemed, if I recall, to be the first one who really knew what you wanted to do. And so I'm just curious, what about this story, and particularly the section of the story that you covered, which was sort of that trek through the woods. What about that story screamed cranky to you? How did you know that's what it needed?
I guess what screamed cranky to me was the way that it ended, that it ended with darkness. So I thought about a journey just totally in one direction, from light to dark. And I also wanted to use the workshops experience to do something that I'd never done as an artist before, which was work on a piece of physical puppetry, or something that had to be handcrafted. It was new to me. So I was also, hoping to find an opportunity to build something that was outside of my comfort zone. And it felt like a perfect fit.
Yeah, that's one of the most amazing things I think about the whole workshop process is you were I've never done this before. And Frank, who was the co-designer with Eric, said, I've never built shadow puppets before. And then not only did you surprise all of us, but I think you also surprised yourselves.
Completely.
And that's so fun. Yeah. Great. Well, Mel, I'm going to come to you next. So while Eric was the first to know what he wanted to do style-wise, you were the first person who said, this is the part of the story that I want. I want this section. Mel did section 2, which was the train ride. And I remember that part of that was based in your desire to really focus on the heart. And I want to ask if you can speak more to how your design highlighted the emotional aspect of the story.
Yeah, I was part of the story writing team with obviously Sadie and Rachel and Eric. And I think when we were trying to narrow down the story into these 5 sections, I kept coming back to there are certain sections that speak to my gut. There are certain sections that are speaking to my heart, or I can't breathe, or like I'm holding my breath. So like the underlying tension of that all was like really speaking. I mean, just listening to Jeanne's voice telling her story, there are moments where like you literally can't breathe. And I wanted to make sure that the underlying tone of the story was being represented in some way. And I just really wanted to make it a little bit more abstract. I think the train section is the first section in the story where you can really play up the juxtaposition between having to present yourself like nothing is wrong in this happy, colorful world, and you're surrounded by singing children and smiling babies, which is Rachel's daughter, for reference. For those of you who don't know, that was the icing on the cake for me, was getting to put some of the family members into that. But then juxtapose that with, you know, the anxiety that's being withheld throughout that entire piece, not only, you know, against the soldiers coming in, but also for the other kids. Like, she's responsible now for, you know, 13 other children that she's in charge of leading. And I think being able to, you know, show up in a way that doesn't scare them, that keeps them at ease and like pushes them through, and while underneath all of that, experiencing all of those heart palpitations was important to me. So it was a fun to experiment with that.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that, Mel. And before I move on to a question for Navi, I want to address a question from the comments. Somebody asked what led to the cardboard look, and that's like the Pointless style. Pointless theater really started in like a very DIY, use whatever you can find, you know. We've been building stuff out of cardboard since we started over 10 years ago. And so when Lee and Kira, who are not on this panel, but who designed section 1, said that they wanted to build their section in cardboard, I think Rachel, I don't want to speak for you, but as I recall, was very excited that we were going to start off with like a sort of a classic Pointless look. So that's sort of where that came from. And speaking of classic Pointless, Pointless is, as Rachel mentioned earlier in the evening, all about smashing boundaries. And Navi, your vision of telling this story, which does take place in the 1940s, by way of what you introduced to us as digital puppetry, I think does just that, like smashes those boundaries pretty hard. And I would love if you could tell us more about digital puppetry and how this story called you to that style.
Yeah, sure. Well, I was very interested in telling this story in some sort of puppetry style, and you know, I enjoy the paintbrush and the toolkit of the digital medium. I think it's something that people just don't realize how relatable it is, in almost a way that a lot of more classical art styles are less relatable to a modern audience. So I was interested from the beginning in playing with like things that people can really relate to, especially now, like Zoom or Google Maps or just the interfaces, and putting it in a context where it is the framework for telling a very serious story. As you both know, there was a longer version of mine that had sections trimmed that sort of couched that idea around a modern time researcher going back and looking at this, which we removed. I think it's cleaner now. But at the same time, the idea with that was, what is puppetry if not, you know, moving something with a string to make people feel like it's alive? And a mouse is literally that, and in a very relatable way. So I made up the idea of mouse puppetry so that I could sell this idea, and it went through a lot of iterations of me going, this is what it's going to look like. I felt like I had to like create the mock-ups because I couldn't just tell you that like, then the mouse goes through street view of a field and then a zoom window pops up. And so yeah, that's mouse puppetry. Copyright.
Thanks, Navi. Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning too that something so amazing about working with Rachel is that when Navi first sort of pitched this idea, like, I want to do this digital puppetry, this mouse puppetry, Rachel said, yep, Like whatever someone brought in, you know, she would say, yep. But then, you know, as we got closer to the ending point, she was so amazing at knowing like what was truly necessary and what wasn't necessarily necessary, which speaks to sort of that trimming that happened later on in the process. But starting off with like a wide lens of yes, 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 do what you want to do, tell this story how you want to tell it, was such a sort of free and lovely way to work. And Rachel, I am gonna bring it back to you to close us out, because a couple folks in the chat asked, what's next for this piece? And that literally hadn't even occurred to me. I think just being so in this version. Have you thought about that? What's next for this piece?
I don't know. I really don't know. It's a great question. And you know, it is a workshop piece, and it really did leave a lot of room for all of us to explore new ways of creating art. I mean, most of us did something we had never, ever done before when we worked on this piece, you know? And so whether or not we move forward on developing this piece more, or just like take those skills and apply them to something else, I don't know. I really don't know. It's so hard to say. And I want to say that this whole experience of working this way, of being separate in different houses while trying to create this piece of artwork together, it's been incredibly rewarding. Don't get me wrong. And at this time when there were no other options, it was like a little bit of a lifeline. But, you know, I'm looking forward to making art together in a room together again at some point in the future. And there can be like a balance of both, right? Giving options. So being able to do work apart and then come together, apart and come together, I feel like would be really nice. And so I didn't answer that question at all, because really the answer is, I don't know. We will continue to share this piece. It's something that I hope will inspire other people to look at their own family histories and want to find those photos of their grandparents and those stories and take them and create art around them. I mean, that's sort of that's the main goal. Say, now it's your turn. Go make something awesome.
Amazing. I think we couldn't possibly end it better than that. So I'm going to call it for the evening. But thank you, designers. Thank you, Rachel, so much for bringing this story to our company. And thanks to everybody who's still watching. If you share the YouTube link or Facebook stream link, people can still watch this. We're not going to like take it down. I'm pretty sure. I hope I'm not lying to you. And hopefully you'll do that. And, you know, a lot of what we do here wouldn't be possible without an audience, right? Art requires an audience and also a little bit of funding. And if you feel so inspired to donate to Pointless Theater Company, that is an option for you. You can do it via PayPal. You can see that link down at the bottom of the screen, and maybe also a link will appear in the chat. But that's about it for tonight from us. Thank you all so much, and we will see you next time.
Hi, like Sadie said, I just want to thank everybody so much for joining us for this special presentation of our Pointless Workshop series. If you loved what you saw, please consider making a donation by following the PayPal link below. Your support goes a really long way to helping us keep our artistic incubator alive and helping our ensemble to create new, original, adventurous art. If you'd like to rewatch or share this video with others, like Sadie said, you can follow the link that's going to be posted on our social media. It's going to be free and accessible over the next month. And we hope that you join us in October as we announce our coming season and as we prepare to welcome back audiences in person this coming spring. Thank you, everybody, and have a good night.